Can you go back about the shepherds again?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yep. This two-sided sand casting is what I'm doing. Casting is nothing more than melting the material and pouring it into a mold. People have been melting metal now for 4, 5, 6,000 years. I can't remember exactly when the metal age started. Tin is one of the first ones to melt. Basically, you're out there on the mountaintop watching your flocks at night. You want to have a fire to cook your food to help keep yourself warm. A little bit of breeze coming across there made the fire hot enough to melt the tin right out of the rock. They find it puddled at the bottom of their fire pit once it's cooled off, and found out, hey, you can hit this with a hammer and make different shapes out of it. Your earliest weapon was probably a tin knife. Doesn't hold an edge very well. Once they know there is a different material in the rocks that can melt, they try different things and they find different metals. Copper was probably one of the next metals to melt because it is such a low temperature melting metal. Once you've melted a couple metals, now you're going to start making combinations of them, alloys. The metal I'm using here right now is pewter, a widespread use. It's also known as Britannia metal, named after Britain. It's used for making eating utensils, forks, spoons. I've made those in the past. Make plates, mugs, jewelry. It's a fairly inexpensive material, very easy to work with. It's soft enough once you made it, cleaning it up to make polishing it up, very easy to do. Once people learn how to melt metal, next step, you go down to the riverbank, you step in the mud, you make a shape in there, you pour the metal in there, it cools off, and then you have that shape on one side. You pour water into a glass. Water will come up over the top of the rim of the glass because of surface tensions. It's even greater with the metal, so it would look like an animal cracker. You'd have it flat on one side or the image on one side, but it'd be bubbled up. A lot of wasted material going in there that would have to be cleaned off if you wanted a knife there. Next up, two-sided mold. You make your original. It can be carved out of wood, it can be made out of clay and baked.
Yeah, I mean, try. You'll see what I mean.
I got the image on two different sides. I place it in my mold. I powdered it lightly. The powder helps keep the sand or clay and water, what they would be working with at that time. Helps it keep it from sticking to the original piece. I have to take the original piece out of my mold. If the sand or clay is sticking to it, it ruins the image. So I wanted the piece to release from the sand or clay as easily and smoothly as possible. Lay the material, the packing material on top, and I pound it down as tight as I can. If I don't pack it tight, have lots of cracks and crevices. Where it's packed nice and tight, it's nice and smooth. Right where that piece is where I want it tight. I want as smooth as finish as I can. If it has those little cracks or crevices in there, when I pour the metal in, that metal will flow into those cracks and you lose a lot of the detail on the finished piece. As I'm packing it, it's also pushing out against the edges of the material, so when I pick up my mold, the sand or clay will stay within it. Okay, next I scrape it fairly smooth. I'm going to have to put the other half of the flask on top and get packet sand in this way. If this side was concave from my mold when I'm pounding through, it can break the mold, so that's why I want a flat surface on it. This piece is going to need to come out of the mold before I'm finished, so there's room to pour the metal in. To help it release smoothly without cracking any of the edges, I'll carve around it about half the thickness of the piece that's in there. Less sand holding on to it, it'll come out of the mold easier. A secondary reason is when I'm packing the sand down the other half of the flask in here, it will form a ridge of sand that fits in here. When I pour the metal in, it has to make 2 turns to actually get out. It will be a lot thinner. If it does so, that's called flashing, and it's very easy to clean up. Carved around it, left a little bit of rough edges, I want the two halves of the mold to come out smooth, as good as possible. I'm just smoothing it off with my fingernail, one of my best tools I have. And I powder the entire side, mainly right around that piece. This is the important part here. If the sand sticks there a little bit, it's not quite as important. We're using talcum powder on this one as our release agent. Originally, ashes from a fireplace would work just fine. Just anything that the sand or clay will not stick to. The mold is keyed so it only can fit together one way. There's two on this side, one on that side. That way I don't actually put it together again the wrong way, because the two pieces won't be right above each other and it'll look really stupid.
I'm going to bring you over here. We can see that way. I'm bringing you right alongside.
We'll just keep switching.
Same as the first half, I need it tightest right around where that piece is. I need it tight all the way through, enough so that when I'm moving the box around, it doesn't fall out, the sand doesn't fall out of it. This side I'm actually going to be a little bit lower. Doesn't matter quite as much, because I won't be working on the other side. I won't be pounding against it the opposite direction. I won't have to worry about it breaking.
Did a lot of like the upsetting part is it takes a long time. That took me like 4 or 5
And now I can see the image on that one side here. I like it when my piece stays on the side where I've carved around. I have to cut a hole, a sprue where I pour the metal in, and some vents to allow the air to come out. If I cut through that trough, it's not going to crack. If I'm cutting a hole, if I carve too deeply, this piece will stay over there, and I have to cut my hole through that ridge, and the ridge has a tendency to crack, and it makes it a little bit harder to get that sprue broken off from it. The larger hole I'm cutting is called the sprue. It's through this hole that I'll be pouring the metal into the mold. I want it right next to, just barely touching the original piece. I don't want too much connection, because then it's harder to break off, because there will be some metal in here connected to that. Missing one of my tools. When I pour the metal in, the metal will flow into the mold faster than the air that's already on the inside can get out. That causes air pressure to build up on the inside of the mold. That air pressure is enough to make the metal, to slow down the flow of the metal, so it doesn't have time to flow all the way through, filling up the entire cavity before it solidifies.
Fortunately, no one else will ever. I still want to get lavish. That's technical. I think that'd be awesome.
So I'd like to have one of my vents or risers a little bit bigger to keep that pressure from building up.
On my other side. Yeah, I don't know what else. I don't know where else to put them. I know I want them though.
The hole, that's the sprue where I'll pour it into. It's a small target to aim at. What I want to do is pour the metal as quickly as possible. That way it's got momentum behind it. It helps push the metal all the way through the mold. To be able to pour it faster, I just cut a small funnel shape in my sprue. Gives me a bigger target to aim at, and it allows me to pour it faster.
Yeah, I'll see. Yeah.
Ready now to remove the original piece. I don't reach down to pick it up with my fingers, because if I did, I could damage the edges of the mold where I'm touching it. Anywhere there's damage, metal will flow into there. It will have to be cleaned off, polished or filed off. So instead I want to barely move it just to make sure that it is loose. I'm also ensuring that I have connection between my screw where the metal comes in and the cavity of the mold itself. Once it's out, I'm going to come up and back down, so you might want to go for a longer shot. To get the piece out, I want it to fall straight down, so I come up, rapidly turn it over and drop it down, have it fall into my hand. If I rolled it slowly over, the downhill side mold might crack just from the weight of that piece. The mold is now completed. I have both halves, both the front and the back image now embedded into the sand. I want to make sure that I don't have any loose grains of sand on the part of the sand where I'm getting the image in there. A loose grain of sand will show up on the finished piece. I had one piece I was doing, it was a painted object, and part of the paint was chipped off. The piece that came out of there, you could see the paint line. It picks up detail as fine as that. So I make sure that the two halves are firmly seated. And also, to help the metal flow through there, I put it on a slight incline. Gravity helps force the metal down through it.
Got a little bit of heat.
Any metal that I can melt, I can cast using this method.
It's on the side. Wow.
I'm casting in pewter. It's an alloy of tin, about 97% tin, 93% tin, about 7% copper. There's a couple of real minor additives tossed in there as well. Different varieties of pewter, their additives about the biggest difference on it. Melting temperature on it is about 600 degrees. It's roughly 3 times hotter than boiling water. It solidifies fairly quick, but it's still extremely hot. Still soft there in the center. As I'm tapping it, I'm listening to the sound. If my knife leaves marks easy, it still could be molten straight down. The part that's in there is already solid. Just when I open it up, I don't want hot metal flowing out of my fingers. It's generally a bad thing. Large circle here on top is the sprue. It flowed down through the mold, filling it up. There's one of my vents, the one that's a little bit larger. It's also called a riser. When I cut it out of the sand, you'll see how the metal rose up behind the air as it's escaping out. The biggest drawback with this method is the mold is a one-time use only. If I want to make multiple copies of this piece, I have to rebuild the mold for each and every time. The sprue where I poured it in came down through it, flowed into the mold, filling it up, and then up, the air came out, a little bit of metal rose up also. The vent is called a riser for that reason. Still about 200 degrees. Enough to burn you if you're not careful. Once this piece is away from that large mass of metal will start cooling off quickly. Please do not reach out and touch it. It will burn you. And the original I said where?
Right there.
This is the one I did.
Oh.
Thank you. I got to usually get in the habit of setting it in the same spot each time. You pick up the writing on both sides. If you look on where the flat surfaces are, you'll see that rough graininess texture. That's individual grains of sand. Even packed, it picks up the detail on it. On the other side, it has a circle with the original 13 colonies all in there. They'll become more clear when I polish it up. I'll take a little bit of very fine grade steel wool to polish it up, smooth out some of the rough spots. And this one has been stained, and then the top surface has been polished to make the text stand out a little bit better.
What is your name?
My name is Pat, or Patton McClack. I'm an Irishman visiting this fine country of England. And then to use the molded material again, I just break it out of the mold, chop it fine. If I try to pack it like this, where the two pieces join together, it will stick but you'll have a line in there. It will show up on the finished piece. So we chop the pieces loose. Make sure there's no extraneous metal in there that might show up on the finished piece.